Hello everyone. Today we will study about the pharynx. Okay, pharynx. Okay. By definition, pharynx is the musculo-membranous structure. Musculo-membranous structure. That means it is made up of muscles covered by the membrane or the fascia or musculofacial is also can also be called as the structure of the pharynx, musculomembranous or musculofacial structure, connecting the nasal cavity, oral cavity to larynx and esophagus. Okay, so how does it connect? I will see. So it is musculo-membranous structure or musculofacial structure connecting nasal cavity and oral cavity to larynx and esophagus. So do you want to have the small diagram? So this is the roof of the nasal cavity. This is hard palate. This is the soft palate. This is mandible. And this is the tongue, epiglottis, hyoid bone, the muscles here, thyroid cartilage, epiglottis. So this will be the larynx. Coming to the pharynx, behind this will be the pharynx. So this is the body of sphenoid bone containing sphenoidal air sinus, pituitary fossa, then basi occiput. Then the first cervical vertebra, the second cervical vertebra, third, the fourth, fifth and sixth cervical vertebrae. First, second, third, fourth, 5, 6. Now the posterior, this space is the pharynx. The posterior wall of the pharynx is continuous. I told you it's made up of muscles and fascia. Roof and the posterior wall is continuous. Fine. Anteriorly, it communicates with the nasal cavity. So this is the nasal cavity. Now this is posterior nasal thing. This is nasal septum. So anteriorly, it communicates with nasal cavity, oral cavity and larynx. Anteriorly communicate with nasal cavity, oral cavity and larynx. Okay. So anteriorly the pharynx is irregular, communicating with nasal cavity, oral cavity and larynx. The portion of the pharynx which is from base of the skull to soft palate. So this is soft palate, that is hard palate. So this is soft palate. So till here, this portion you call it as nasopharynx. The portion between soft palate and epiglottis, this portion, this you call it as oropharynx. till the sixth cervical vertebra. From epiglottis to sixth cervical vertebra, you call it as laryngopharynx. Laryngopharynx. Okay, and at the level of sixth cervical vertebra, the larynx continues as trachea and pharynx continues as esophagus. So a part of the pharynx. So nasal extent. So first is definition and main connection. Extend from base of the skull. So this is sphenoid bone, body of sphenoid. Till the sixth cervical vertebra or lower border of cricoid cartilage. So that you can put it till the sixth cervical vertebra or lower border of cricoid cartilage. So that is the extent. Musculomembranous or musculofacial structure. Posterior wall and roof of the pharynx are continuous, whereas the anterior wall is irregular, communicating with nasal cavity, the oral cavity and the larynx. Okay, so the pharynx can be divided into nasopharynx, oropharynx and laryngopharynx. At the level of lower border of the sixth cervical vertebra, pharynx continues as esophagus. Okay, so the remaining portions, all these is the lateral wall of the pharynx. So let us take up one by one. What is the features of nasopharynx, oropharynx and laryngopharynx? Coming to the nasopharynx. Okay, nasopharynx. So already I have told you the diagram I have given you. So this is hard palate, soft palate. This is the frontal bone, cribriform plate of ethmoid, then body of sphenoid containing sphenoidal air sinus, pituitary fossa, base occiput, the first cervical vertebra, the second cervical vertebra, and these are the concha, lateral wall of the nasal cavity, concha, superior concha, middle concha and inferior concha. So this is mandible, this is tongue, hyoid bone, thyroid cartilage, epiglottis, larynx and this is the roof and posterior wall of the pharynx. So already I told you at the level of sixth cervical vertebra, the pharynx continuous 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, pharynx and larynx continue as esophagus. Okay, so this is nasopharynx. Nasopharynx is bounded above by body of sphenoid, that is roof, body of sphenoid. Posteriorly, basi-occiput and partly first cervical vertebra and second. Below it is limited by soft palate. Soft palate. Below it is limited by soft palate. Anteriorly communicate with nasal cavity. Communicate with nasal cavity through posterior nasal aperture. Okay. Posterior nasal aperture. Now this is this thing. So this whole thing is the lateral wall of the nasopharynx. Lateral wall of nasopharynx. Okay. Lateral wall of the nasopharynx has an important features. Before going to lateral wall, again I am repeating, the roof of the lateral wall of nasal cavity is formed by body of the sphenoid bone with sphenoidal air sinus, posteriorly basi-occiput and first and partly second cervical vertebra, below limited by soft palate, and anteriorly communicates with nasal cavity through posterior nasal aperture, and the lateral wall has some important features. Nasopharynx has some important features. What are the important features in the lateral wall? Okay. Most important feature in the lateral wall of nasal cavity is an opening here, that you call it as the pharyngeal opening of auditory tube. Lateral wall, number one, pharyngeal opening of auditory tube. So if you take the auditory tube connects the nasopharynx and middle ear cavity. Middle ear cavity, pharyngeal opening. This is pharyngeal opening of auditory tube, and this is auditory tube. Okay. This has got cartilaginous part. This is cartilaginous part and bony part. Cartilaginous part and bony part. Okay. So this auditory tube has cartilaginous and bony portion. So the first important structure in the lateral wall is pharyngeal opening of auditory tube. This pharyngeal opening of auditory tube is bounded above and behind by an elevation. The second one you call it as tubal elevation. Tubal elevation. Tubal elevation is mainly because of cartilaginous part of the auditory tube. From tubal elevation, you do find a small extension onto the lateral wall of the pharynx. This extension, number 3, is, you call it as salpingo pharyngeal fold. Pharyngeal fold. Salpingo-pharyngeal fold contains salpingo-pharyngeus muscle. So this is number 3. And behind the whole thing, you have a space. This space, you call it as pharyngeal recess. The fourth important thing in the lateral wall is pharyngeal recess. Pharyngeal recess. Now, another important structure here you find near the roof and posterior wall. There is accumulation of lymphoid tissue. Okay, behind this is enlarged diagram, so you do find like this. So behind this is accumulation of lymphoid tissue. This number 5, you call it as tubal tonsil. Sorry. This you call it as pharyngeal tonsil. Pharyngeal tonsil. Okay. So there is one more fold coming from anterior part of the pharyngeal opening to the soft palate. So this is number 6. Number 6, you call it as salpingo-palatine fold. Number 6, salpingo. Salpinx means tube to the palate. So number 6 is salpingo palatine fold. So this is the basic structure of nasopharynx. Nasopharynx, upper portion of the pharynx, roof, posterior wall, anterior communication, below is soft palate, and nasopharynx. At this junction of nasopharynx and oropharynx, this you call it as pharyngeal isthmus. Pharyngeal isthmus is junction of nasopharynx and oropharynx. So that is nasopharynx. Lateral wall of the nasopharynx is very important. Number 1 is pharyngeal opening of auditory tube. Auditory tube connects the pharynx and middle ear cavity. This tube is short in children, and this tube is lined by, half of it is lined by the cartilage and half of it is lined by the bony portion. So it has two portions, cartilaginous part and bony part. This is middle ear cavity. So what you are seeing here is opening. Tubal elevation is the cartilaginous part of auditory tube. Number 3, salpingo-pharyngeal fold containing salpingo-pharyngeus muscle. Number 4 is pharyngeal recess or depression behind the tubal elevation, you call pharyngeal recess. Number 5 is posterior wall and roof has got collection of lymphoid tissue. So this collection of lymphoid tissue, you call it as the pharyngeal tonsil, and there is one more fold anteriorly from tube to the soft palate. This you call salpingo-palatine fold. So these are all the features which are present in the lateral wall of the nasal cavity. Clinical anatomy. Clinical anatomy, it is, I told you already, auditory tube is shorter in children. So any nasal infection can go through this auditory tube into the middle ear cavity, causing what do you call as condition, you call it as otitis media. Clinical anatomy, I don't know where I should write clinical anatomy. Okay. Otitis media. Number one, clinical anatomy. Okay. Number one, otitis media. That is infection of middle ear. Otitis means ear. Infection you call middle ear. And any nasal infection here or any pharyngitis causes enlargement of this pharyngeal tonsil. Enlargement of pharyngeal tonsil, we call it as adenoids. Go through these two important clinical conditions. Make a small note on this. So this is nasal